In the silence of forgotten landscapes, beneath layers of earth, sand, and jungle, lie the remains of entire worlds that once believed they would last forever. Cities that echoed with voices, markets that overflowed with life, temples that reached toward the sky in devotion and pride. And yet today, nothing remains above the surface but silence. No warnings carved into stone, no final messages left behind. Only questions. How does an entire society disappear as if it was erased from time itself? The most unsettling truth is that these civilizations did not vanish in a single moment of destruction. They faded through processes so gradual that those living inside them could not recognize the end as it was happening. And by the time the final shift became visible, the system had already collapsed far beneath awareness. Long before collapse, these societies lived in moments of absolute confidence. Agriculture expanded across fertile valleys, trade routes connected distant cultures, and cities grew into dense centers of innovation and belief. People woke to the same rhythms every day: the sound of labor, the movement of goods, the repetition of rituals that reinforced stability. Everything suggested permanence. Even the sky and its predictable cycles seemed to confirm that nothing would change. In such environments, civilizations do not imagine their own disappearance. They interpret growth as destiny. Expansion becomes normal, complexity becomes invisible, and dependence on systems grows so deeply embedded that no single individual can perceive how fragile the entire structure has become. But beneath this surface of stability, subtle pressures begin to form. Climate patterns shift in ways too gradual to provoke alarm. Rivers change course. Harvests fluctuate slightly, not enough to cause panic, but enough to strain storage systems and distribution networks. Resources that once felt endless begin to require careful management, yet societies adapt, not by questioning the system itself, but by intensifying the same behaviors that built it. More farming, more expansion, more extraction, and in this cycle of adaptation, an invisible threshold slowly approaches. The collapse does not announce itself. It disguises itself as normal life, continuing under increasing strain. As generations pass, early warning signs become part of everyday existence. Minor shortages are accepted as temporary, local conflicts over land or water increase, but are interpreted as isolated events. Leadership structures respond with administrative adjustments, new rules, and short-term solutions designed to preserve stability rather than question its foundations. And still, the deeper system weakens. Interconnected networks that once ensured resilience begin to lose redundancy. Trade disruptions ripple farther than before. Small failures no longer remain contained. They spread, quietly at first, then repeatedly. But perception lags behind reality, and society continues forward, convinced that correction is always possible. At the same time, cultural and political systems begin to absorb the pressure. Central authority strengthens in response to instability, demanding more resources, more labor, more loyalty. This creates tension between center and periphery, between cities and rural zones, between those who distribute resources and those who produce them. Inequality expands not always in wealth, but in vulnerability. Some regions become increasingly dependent on fragile supply lines. Others are burdened with extraction demands that exceed natural recovery. The system does not break all at once. It begins to bend in multiple directions simultaneously, each stress point reinforcing the next. Eventually, moments of disruption begin to accumulate. A failed harvest here, a disrupted trade route there, a regional conflict that escalates beyond containment. Each event appears manageable in isolation, but together they form a pattern that no single institution can fully comprehend. Decision-makers respond to immediate crises without seeing the systemic convergence beneath them. And as pressure increases, the margin for error narrows. What once required decades to destabilize can now shift within years. Still, the illusion of control persists, because civilizations are not designed to recognize their own structural limits while operating within them. Then comes the phase where stability begins to fracture openly. Storage systems fail under compounding shortages. Migration increases as populations move in search of survival. Local governance weakens as central authority struggles to maintain coherence across distant regions. Communication slows, trust erodes. The infrastructure that once connected everything begins to disconnect piece by piece. And in this disconnection, isolated communities start to form, each attempting to survive independently. But the strength of the system was never in its parts. it was in the network between them, and that network is now breaking apart. When full collapse arrives, it does not resemble a single dramatic event. It appears instead as a rapid succession of failures that reinforce one another. Supply lines stop functioning. Cities can no longer be sustained at previous densities. Administrative structures dissolve under the weight of unmanageable complexity. People abandon urban centers not because of one decisive moment, but because accumulated instability makes continuation impossible. The system does not fall, it empties, and what remains is not destruction, but absence. In the aftermath, survivors face a world where knowledge still exists, but the infrastructure to support it does not. Fields return to wilderness, buildings decay without maintenance, writing systems are gradually forgotten as generations pass without institutional continuity. The memory of what once existed becomes fragmented, preserved only in oral traditions, scattered artifacts and ruins slowly reclaimed by nature. And over time, even the understanding that a complex civilization once stood there begins to fade. What is most striking in these vanished societies is not their destruction, but their gradual disappearance from collective awareness. Future generations often encounter their remains without fully comprehending the scale of what preceded them. A broken wall becomes just a ruin. A collapsed structure becomes just stone. The living context is lost, and with it, the understanding that entire systems of human organization can rise, function for centuries, and then dissolve almost completely without a singular moment of annihilation. Modern interpretation of these collapses continues to evolve, as archaeology and environmental science reconstruct fragmented evidence. Patterns begin to emerge: environmental stress, overextension of resources, systemic dependency, and failure of adaptive response. Yet no single cause explains the total disappearance. Instead, collapse reveals itself as convergence, multiple pressures aligning over time until resilience is no longer possible. The most important lesson is not found in any one civilization, but in the repeated structure of their decline. And still, perhaps the most haunting realization remains this: every society that disappeared once believed it had time to adapt, time to recover, time to correct imbalance before it became irreversible. But collapse does not announce its deadline. It arrives only when the system can no longer support its own complexity, and by then, the distinction between survival and disappearance is already gone, separated only by a threshold that no one recognized while standing on it.